Welcome to StartupHakk. I'm Spencer Thomason, and here at StartupHakk, we love to train software developers and build custom software solutions. So I do a lot of work as a fractional CTO. With over a decade of executive leadership and a solid 25 years in software development, I've mastered the art of transforming technology teams and products. So today we're going to dive into the infamous founders mode. This has been taking the internet by storm. So what exactly is founders mode, in case you haven't heard? Paul Graham coined the term to describe a mental state that founders can get into, a state of hyper-focus and deep involvement in the product or company. And this has been blowing up the internet, and everybody has an opinion about this. It's kind of funny, like Monday was a holiday, and so I wasn't online a ton, and I came back and I'm like, oh my goodness, like this is just taking the internet by storm. So let's dive into this today and talk about what founders mode is, what my thoughts on it are, and as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts. So let's dive into this today. Okay, so let's dive into founders mode. So let's talk about this here. So what exactly is it? So I'm going to share my screen here really quick. Get switched over here. Make this a little bit bigger. All right. So during a recent, at a YC event, which stands for Y Combinator event last week, Brian Chesky, who if you don't know who that is, he's the CEO of Airbnb, who was really one of the best success stories of Y Combinator and one of the earlier startups that went through Y Combinator, but really definitely still one of their poster children. So Brian Chesky gave a talk that everyone who was there will remember. Most founders I talked to afterwards, and so this is written by Paul Graham, right, who runs Y Combinator at this point. And so he says, most founders I talked to afterwards said it was the best they'd ever heard. Ron Conway, for the first time in his life, forgot to take notes. I thought that was really funny. So apparently there was no recordings of this, which is kind of funny because I didn't think that anything happened anymore that there wasn't a recording of somewhere. But apparently there wasn't a recording of this, so all we're getting is everybody who was there, which was a fairly small group, and their takeaway. So I'm not going to try to reproduce it here. Instead, I want to talk about a question. It raised, and so it's this kind of this combination between it's kind of the question between Paul Graham's take on it that's also blowing up the storm, or blowing up the internet. But the whole thing in general has kind of taken to the internet. So the theme of Brian's talk was that conventional wisdom about how to run larger companies is mistaken. Okay, so he's saying that there's a problem here. As Airbnb grew, well-meaning people advised him that he had to run the company in a certain way for it to scale. Their advice could be optimistically summarized as hire good people and give them room to do their jobs. Okay, and this is kind of the whole premise around founders mode, right? Hire good people, give them room to do their jobs. So he followed this advice. So again, this is Brian Chesky, the founder of Airbnb, talking about this. He followed this advice, and the results were disastrous. They were bad, right? Like, he took the advice, and a lot of the people who told him this were some of his board and investors, so people he kind of felt like he had to listen to, and people who he felt should have known, right? Air quotes, should have known. So he had to figure out a better way on his own, which he did partly by studying how Steve Jobs ran Apple. So then this becomes in kind of the core of really one of the best examples of founders mode. So far, it seems to be working. Airbnb's free cash flow margin is now among the best in Silicon Valley. So this event included a lot of the most successful founders we've funded, and one after another said that the same thing happened to them. Okay, so I think that was the other part of this, right? It wasn't just Brian who said this. One person who said it, but now Paul Graham, and so they've given the same advice about how to run their companies as they grew, but instead of helping companies, it damaged them. So why is everyone telling these founders that they're wrong? That was the big mystery to me. And after mulling it over for a bit, I figured out the answer. What they're being told was how to run a company you hadn't founded. How to run a company if you're merely a professional manager. So this is where we come into what's being now coined as founders mode versus manager mode, right? But this MO is so much less effective that to founders it feels broken. There are things founders can do that managers can't, and not doing them feels wrong to founders because it is. So he's saying that in fact there are two different ways to run a company, founders mode and managers mode. till now, most people, even in Silicon Valley, have implicitly assumed that scaling a startup means switching to manager mode. Now, and so this is where I'm going to start to break away from just reading you what Paul Graham says here, but instead kind of give you some of my thoughts and also some of the thoughts across the internet, because there's a lot of different thinking out there. And so this is, so Paul Graham I think has really hit onto something here, right? And as people started to talk about this, of course, Hacker News blew up, super long. Look at my scroll bar here, right? Like crazy amount of people. Like when I say the internet blew up, I mean, this talk was given, I think on Friday. So like this was originally posted 3 days ago, right? Like in today's Wednesday, or Thursday. So I don't even know what day of the week it is. So we can see that, this was 3 days ago. So the internet was taken by storm with this, right? And tons of people out there are all giving their opinions. So Paul Graham talked about founders versus manager mode, and Twitter blew up. I have two conflicting thoughts on this because I think PG's essay is making two separate arguments. First, I do think the successful companies led by their founders outperform the market. And that's one of the things that I think is very interesting, because time and time again as a startup founder, I was always told, well, there's going to come a point where you can't grow this anymore, so just be prepared for that. And I've always kind of looked at some of these like Zuckerberg and Jobs and some of these others who did really well and thought, that's kind of funny. Like a lot of the best ones have done this. Prime example, NVIDIA. I think that's because founders have two advantages. They have context about their product and market that compound over decades, right? And that's true. In the age of 4-year stock options, most managers don't stay around for that long. Second, PG says the manager mode didn't work for Brian Chesky or Steve Jobs. I have tremendous respect in how it was built. At the same time, when I watched Brian's talk, so I don't know how this dude watched it. Oh, maybe he was there. He must have been there. Yeah, because he was Y Combinator 24, right? I couldn't help but think how different his leadership style was than Jeff Bezos or Satya Nadella. In the end, Amazon and Microsoft scaled the traditional way, so I don't agree that manager mode doesn't work, right? But I think Brian might have kind of touched on this, and it's interesting because he's an original take, and then Brian comes back and writes this and says an original take. And I think whatever it's after mulling over a bit, what we're being told is how to run a company you haven't founded, right? And at the end of the day, Satya Nadella didn't found Microsoft, right? And so, and Bezos scaled in a more manager-style way where he hired really good people around him. Because originally, you might argue that the company he founded was selling a bunch of books. Now, I know there's a lot more, and he grew it to a lot more than that. But I think a lot of their scale hit at the point once he started leading away from their from their kind of their core business. Now, the next one here, right? And so again, I could have come up when I was going through doing my research for this. I think I probably could come up with 100 people's take on this. I mean, just going into here alone, I could come up with 100 people's take. This has really blown up the internet. So, as with always, the best compliment you can give me is to give me your thoughts. Give me a comment. Hit me up in a comment down below, even if it's just to say hi. But tell me your thoughts about founders mode versus manager mode. Do you think, where are your thoughts on this, right? So while Silicon Valley is arguing over the CEO mode and polarizing the idea of leadership, I disagree with the idea of polarizing leadership. You cannot polarize leadership. It is far more nuanced. We cannot say that CEO style can be simplified either founder or manager. There's a constant zoom in, zoom out needed when you're in the leadership position that is this is the very definition of leadership. I actually agree with this one. This is part of the reason I pulled this one up is because I agree. I think as a manager, and I think actually what my opinion of this is, and what my take here really is I think leaders need to be able to scale in and scale out. I think you need to be able to work in your business and work on your business. I'm a huge fan of the book of Traction, right? So I love Traction. They call it the OS for running your business, operating system for running your business. Huge fan of Traction because it talks a lot about this, that says that that leaders need to be able to dig in and work in their business, and then they need to be able to zoom out at times and work on their business. And I think if you don't do both, I think you're going to fail. My guess is that that's what Brian's done, right? I guarantee you he's not taking customer service calls every day, right? So then that definitely wouldn't be the definition. And I don't think that's what he's saying here. But my point is that, and so let's dive into a couple of others here. I'm going to kind of pull up a chart that I found out here that I thought was really helpful. Pull this up here really quick. Scale this. All right. So we've got Amazon, and Amazon definitely, at least of today, followed this approach. And Bezos was very, manager style, right? He started with a manager type style. He hired a lot of people. Google, lots of direct reports, and those direct reports had many direct reports, but they allowed their direct reports to really cross, right? And that was, I think, one of the things is I think they kind of ended up. I think part of Google's success was their ability to take the heads of their division and make them founders, essentially, right? And a lot of them did. A lot of Google successes grew up through. A lot of their successes grew up through because they treated each of these dots here across this line here as founders, and so they empowered them and enabled them as founders, right? Facebook, definitely the definition of founders mode, definitely, without a question. Zuckerberg was all over the place, and he touched everything, and he had 1 billion direct reports. Even today, I think he's still hacking on stuff. I think he's probably removed himself more and is more of a glorified board member now. I don't think he's writing code or anything now. And I'm not saying he's writing code anytime recently, but then there was the old Microsoft, right? And I think there's some implied. Thanks for the shout out, Kevin Jacob. Appreciate that. Coming from Dubai, it looks like. That's awesome. The Apple mode, right? They even built their headquarters this way, right? This is what I think is really interesting. And Tim Cook has a ton of direct reports. Now, that being said, Steve Jobs' success was because of Tim Cook's success in manufacturing. And Steve Jobs did both, right? As as Paul Graham here goes on to talk about, he says, and he references back again to Brian's talk on this. Where is it? Okay. Man, where'd it go? Oh, well, it was in something else. When Steve Jobs was originally running, when Steve Jobs came back to Apple, one of the first things he did was he started doing these off-sites with 100 employees. And he would just take what he called the 100 most important employees. A lot of times they were engineers, they were managers, they were various different places. And so it kind of came up with this idea of like a skip level meeting, right? Where managers could dive in and skip a level. And I think he talks about this here. Hiring good people, give them room to their job sounds great when it's described that way, doesn't it? Except in practice, judging from the report of the founder after founder, what was often turned out to mean is hire professional fakers and let them drive the company into the ground. There may be a different problem there, right? And that may be part of this that I talked about with Google. You need to empower these people below you to be able to become founders. They need to be able to be founders of their specific product. And so, I think that's part of this too. One thing I noticed in Brian's talk and when talking to founders afterwards was the idea of being gaslit. Founders feel like they're being gaslit from both sides by people telling them they have to run their companies like managers and by people working for them when they do. Usually when everyone around you disagrees with you, your default assumption should be that you're mistaken. But this is one of the rare exceptions. VCs who haven't been founders themselves don't know how founders should run a company. And C-level execs as a class include some of the most skillful liars in the world. That's pretty powerful take from Paul Graham. So it's kind of interesting. But whatever founder mode consists of, it's pretty clear that it's going to break the principle the CEO should engage with the company only via his direct reports. Skip level meetings have become the norm instead of a practice so unusual that there's a name for it. And once you abandon that constraint, there are a huge number of permutations to choose from. And I think that's what he's trying to get at here. And I agree with that. I think we've got to break down if the Amazon structure here was the only way to do it, I think that's where we start to get into trouble, right? And that's where you start to get cross-department. I mean, this sounds governmental, right? And we all know that the government does not work, right? And so I think there's some other jokes in here, too, with like the guns pointing at each other from old Microsoft. And so I definitely think that as we dive through and look into founders mode, it's one of those things where we can look at like Bezos versus Nadella, and let's compare these two, right? So founder of Amazon, current CEO of Microsoft, right? Bezos is all about founders mode, and he often maintains that hands-on leadership. Sorry, I lost my place in my notes. Often maintains a hands-on leadership style at Amazon. He's known for hyper involvement, ensuring Amazon stayed customer-focused and driving innovation. Nadal, on the other hand, is more strategic. He doesn't always need to be in the trenches. Now, both methods obviously work. These are two hugely successful companies. But there's a difference that lies in timing and scalability. Nadal is more about building systems and empowering teams, while Bezos was about relentless execution. So the key takeaway here is that there's a time for each. So, so Amazon hierarchy is disciplined and it's streamlined. Every node will lead back to the center. But compared to like Facebook, it's almost chaotic, right? The interconstruction. But it's like the Wild West, and that's kind of, I think, part of their success. So ultimately, I'm curious to hear what your guys' thoughts are. Everybody seems to have an opinion on Founders Mode, and I definitely wanted to jump in and weigh in. I've actually found that I definitely lead more in the Founders Mode style. I love to give people room to do their jobs, for sure, but I definitely like to keep track. But I definitely like to keep track of where projects are. I find that if projects are stalling and taking too long, a lot of times I'm able to help remove roadblocks either directly, like with my individual contribution, or by just saying, have you talked to this person, or have you done this, or have you, and so I always will go into a meeting, and I think my employees would definitely agree that they hear this all the time and say, I'm going to ask the dumb question now, and almost every time the dumb question seems to break loose some level of thinking. And so I'm not afraid to ask the quote unquote dumb question. And I think those dumb questions come from years of having run the business. And I think it's from having different perspectives than somebody maybe in the trenches. Because if you think about the term in the trenches, you can't see very far, right? Like you're in the trench, you're down in the ditch working on something, right? And so in the trenches means you are working hard. However, the commander up on the post sometimes can see further. He's not going to be the one to dig, and he's not going to be the one to move. He's not going to be the one to go strike the enemy, right? But the visibility from that range can give him a lot that he can then go and help empower the people to do their jobs. So I think the term Founders Mode, like a lot of people are saying that Founders Mode means micromanagement. I hate the term micromanagement because I think my employees would attest that I'm not there to try to micromanage them. I'm there to try to empower them and to help them. And I think that's the difference. I think if you're coming in and saying, hey, you got to do this my way, that's the definition of micromanagement to me. But to me, Founders Mode gives a good discussion to where as a manager, I can drop down to any level, and it still doesn't mean that I'm not going to have management, right? I can still have a lead on a product or a lead on a project and give it to them and let them run with it. So, but then I can come in and help give ideas, help make connections, help troubleshoot. Like I mean, and sometimes I'm even just running as an extra tester, which can also help. So those are all kind of my thoughts around Founders Mode. What are some of your guys' thoughts? I appreciate when you guys give me comments. It's literally the best compliment that I can give. And here at StartupHakk, we love to train software developers in our coding boot camps, as well as build custom software solutions for companies. So hit us up because, as always, I love to not just be a founder of my organization. I love to come in and take ownership and help be a founder of your organization. And I can help instill a lot of these principles that I'm teaching here into your organization and help bring this experience as a fractional CTO where I can see things because I've now worked across multiple different companies in my career. But that can become your strength. Your strength can become the ability that I have to be able to bring an outside perspective. But then I can also help strengthen your inside secret sauce. And that's, I think, one of the really great ways that fractional CTOs can bring in a lot of power into a team. So make sure you hit us up if you're looking for a fractional CTO, startuphakk.com/Spencer, or if you're looking for the coding bootcamp or custom coaching, hit startuphakk.com. And otherwise, we will catch you guys next time. Make sure you like and subscribe to the channel because we bring you lots of great tutorials and tips that every developer should know. See you next time.